Hello friends, my name is Kiran Singh and some of you might know me as the president of the International Storytelling Center in Jonesville, Tennessee. However, along with stories, I also love to cook. Food, for me, is actually one of the many ways we can share stories with each other. In fact, it's one of the best ways we can share our stories with each other. Now, I'm sure that many of you have stories about a certain dish that your grandmother always cooked or served perhaps during Thanksgiving, or a favorite meal that perhaps appeared at the community potluck. Maybe there are dishes that you cook now because of those people and their stories, or from places and people and events in your life or traditions to remind you of where you came from. In Britain, I grew up in a cultural tradition that frequently involved cooking with our large extended family. My family originate from Punjab in northern India, but East Africa was their home for many years, before they came to Britain as refugees. Now, often at community or family functions in England, we'd have hundreds gathered from several families, all to prepare and to cook together. And we would gather for all types of events, including Diwali or Vaisakhi, Christmas, weddings and funerals. For such events, my mother was my primary teacher. She'd invite me to join her as she prepared the meals in the kitchen, a lesson that was always accompanied with family stories from our heritage. I'd cut up the onions and tomatoes, and once the main tomato masala base was made, my mum would take a small scoop, put it on a piece of bread, and she would ask me to taste it to see if it needed any salt or any added spices. I was honoured to be her chief taster. She'd repeat the spices like a poem. Haldi loon mirch masala. That was the order of primary spices that should go into the base curry. Kind of had a ring to it, and I still remember it to this day. Later I learned about cooking from my father. For some years my mother was ill and spent time in hospital, but my dad would prepare a crock pot so that my brother and I had something to eat when we got home from school. He said that every man needs to learn how to cook in case the time came when we needed to look after ourselves, or to cook for others. When my mother passed away at a young age, my aunties would often prepare homemade curries and meals, and we'd freeze them so we could reheat them later. But after a while, I asked them to stop, not because I wasn't grateful, but because I wanted my family, especially my dad, to have the smell of home cooking being prepared. It was the smell of these spices that warmed the house, and the stories that accompanied the cooking that made a house a home. In a sense, I took over the role of my mother and often cooked for my older brother and my dad. I'd call them daily to see what they wanted to eat and when they got home. But we also took it in turns. My brother and I were fortunate to have learned many of these dishes from our mother. Just a few years ago, a friend and I cooked up the idea here in East Tennessee that we'd prepare an Appalachian-style curry community dinner. And that night, 150 people came together. And we dished out our first Appalachian curry dinner in the site of Buffalo Mountain. It had all the same base ingredients that we'd use to go into a traditional curry. But we added things like okra and carrots and sweet potato, eggplants, and other vegetables that had been grown locally. We named this Appalachian Mountain Masala, and it was a hit. Like our stories, food is something we can share to build common ground and to connect with one another. We get to create moments that become part of our identity, part of our shared stories. Whatever's going on in the world, we can always invite a neighbor or a friend or even someone that we don't know very well that has a different view of the world. We get to share a meal, or we get to break bread together. In the Sikh tradition, we consider serving food to others and sitting down to eat a meal with one another as one of the highest forms of prayer. On some level, that's a tradition that crosses all faiths and cultural backgrounds. Having worked in various peace-building efforts, I often ask participants to tell me stories about their food. And as a way to kind of begin with something that they may already know about. Because food, like storytelling, is part of a shared language. Some years back, I visited East Africa to pay homage to the place and home where my mother grew up. and where my older brother was born, and where much of my family lived for many, many years, a place they called home. And one day we stopped off at a street market on the side of the road in Uganda to buy red chilies, and I remember looking up and seeing the sign that read, "Every meal is a story." I took a picture, as I really liked that idea. I have always liked how each day, breakfast, lunch and dinner, has a beginning, middle and an end, just like a story. With everything going on in the world, when it feels like sometimes overwhelming, that we can't do anything, I believe that one of the best ways and simplest ways, most powerful things that we can do is simply to enjoy a meal with a friend or even a stranger. Whether you're breaking bread or sharing a curry, it's one of the best times to share a story. Sharing this common necessity can help build relationships between two people, two groups, two communities. If you're eating the dish that I've made for Jonesboro Locally Grown, whether that is the meat curry or the non-veg curry, as it's said in India, the healthy yogurt bundi raita, the Southern-style cornbread with a little masala tandoori twist, the gajrera, a sweet dish made from carrots, know that this is some of the food that I grew up with. It is the food that my mother taught my brother and me to make. And now my brother also now shares this food in his Jarjort Punjabi food company based in Leeds in England. August the 8th is our late mother's birthday. It's also the 9th anniversary of my arrival to this country, the United States. So I could think of no better way than to celebrate this day by cooking for you all. As my mother taught us, in addition to the masala base used to make these dishes, there are 3 other ingredients that are very important to all cooking, especially Indian cooking. And that is 1 teaspoon of patience, 2 tablespoons of intuition, and 3 tablespoons of love. Thanks to the Boone Street Market, to Jonesboro Locally Grown, and all the farmers that are helping to make sure that during this time we have good, healthy food coming to our tables. Enjoy your meal. Namaste.